hearts to the Lord. And so what we see here in Colossians 3:16 is that we are commanded to engage in worship music in a certain way. Paul speaks to these Christians, and what is the main verb or command found in this verse? It is the word let, as we see in our English. Actually, the Greek word is actually translated into two words. It is let dwell. Let dwell. Well, what are we letting dwell in us? Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. And that word you is in the plural, you all. It's talking to the whole congregation. Paul is speaking to all the church members. As they come together, they are to let the word of Christ dwell in them, dwell in us richly. Well, how is this accomplished? Paul does not leave us in the dark. He gives us some participles that are connected to the words let and dwell, so that we can know exactly what is going on for us to accomplish letting the word of Christ dwell in us richly. Now, you look at many translations and you will see that it's all put in one sentence, because that's the way Paul put it. There are translations out there, very few, that will break it up into different sentences, making it seem like there's this command of singing and then there's this other command and this other command, like they're done separate and apart from each other. But they're actually all one sentence. All the words work together. So what are the different ways, or the ways that are done to accomplish this? Well, there it tells us: teaching, admonishing, singing. That is what's being done for us to accomplish letting the word of Christ dwell in us richly. Teaching and admonishing, instruction through warning, are done through psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Now, the Bible does not reveal to us, or it does not get specific in the distinctions between psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, but we know at least that all of them require words. Now, how do we know for sure that each one of these distinct style songs involve words? Because Paul says teaching and admonishing one another. How are we going to teach and admonish one another certain things, or teach each other certain subjects, if we do not use words? They have to have words. How do we know that all have words? It's because Paul says teaching and admonishing, and Paul says in all wisdom. But it's interesting also in this sentence that he says one another. One another. It's a reciprocal action, meaning all the members, as Paul is talking to all the church members, he's telling the church members, you do this to one another. The song leader, as the song leader is singing to you all, you sing back to the song leader. Everybody is singing to each other. We do this together. They come to Christians come together and they teach and admonish each other back and forth. And then Paul continues the sentence by saying, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. This lets us know that we're not just merely reading the lyrics to one another. We are singing, but notice what he directs the singing to. As we're teaching and admonishing one another, we are singing to God. We're singing to God, and we're making melody in our hearts to the Lord. And so we look at this and we see that this verse is put in a precise manner. It's crafted in such a precise manner to let us know that God is concerned with the details. God is concerned with the details when it comes to worship music. This verse does not imply, it does not infer, it does not touch on or hint or directly state that we can or should include musical instruments, as that is not what God has said. If we are to properly worship God in the manner that he plainly says, then we know that we are pleasing to him. Second, let's go to Ephesians chapter 5. If this was not enough, Paul says this again in the book of Ephesians, Here he's speaking to a group of Christians in the city of Ephesus. Ephesians chapter 5. The verse is specifically verse 19, but I'm going to read all of verse 18 through 21 because it is all one sentence. Again, like Colossians 3:16, this passage all works together. There in verse 18, and do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of God. What are the two commands? What are the two main commands in this passage? The first one is, there it says in verse 18, do not be drunk with wine. The second is, be filled with the Spirit. And it is the second command where he continues to show us how is this accomplished. How are we to be filled with the Spirit? We don't have to insert our opinion in this. We don't have to push our belief into this. He goes on to say, this is how you are to be filled with the Spirit. Now, first consider the negative command, really quick. Don't be drunk with wine. When people are drunk, they are under the control of the substance. They are not able to carry out sound judgments. They're not able to decide for themselves and carry what they want out because their full intellect is being hindered. And so it does not matter how much knowledge they have of God's will. If they're under the influence, they are not being led by the Spirit. Now consider the second command. Be filled with the Spirit, which is being contrasted with being drunk. Here you cannot make sound judgments. You cannot make good decisions. You cannot carry out proper actions. But if you are filled with the Spirit, you can. The Spirit gives us these words, and it teaches us how we are to act. And the more we have this knowledge in our minds, we are able to do that. Well, how are we to fill ourselves with the Spirit where we make good decisions? That's where the present participles come into play. There he says in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 19, there's 5 present participles. Speaking, singing, making melody, giving thanks, and submitting. We do all those things right there, and we are being filled with the Spirit. Now, the first one up here in the PowerPoint gives the first 3. Speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Just like in Colossians 3:16, it involves words. One another, we're doing it to one another. It's a reciprocal action. We do it through different style songs. How do we know that it's not just reading? Well, Paul says singing. Just like in Colossians 3:16, he says it again here. And then third, he says making melody in your heart. Doing it with sincerity. You speak to one another, we sing to God, but we also make melody in our heart. Here's a side note. The word melody, it comes from the Greek word salantes or salo, which if you were to look at the definition of that, the basic definition is to pluck or to pull if you're plucking a string. And so those who advocate for musical instruments to be inserted into the worship and worshiping God with those instruments, they'll say, well, you look at this word melody and it basically means to pluck a string. But where is the plucking of the string happening? It is happening in the heart. We're not literally plucking strings in our heart, and so it's figurative in nature. It's talking about plucking of strings, yes, but it's in the heart. We're doing it with sincerity. That's what it's talking about. That's what Paul is telling the congregation there in Ephesus, and that's what he's telling us. But, you know, along with this verse, we're to be giving thanks always for all things. We give thanks to God through our songs as well. We do it in the name of Christ, by the authority of Christ. Fifth, we're submitting to one another in the fear of God. We do it with humility. And so this sentence is crafted in such a precise manner to let us know that God is concerned with the details. If you notice that this verse, all these details do not contradict what's found in Colossians 3:16. They overlap pretty good because this is what God wants. If we are to do it God's way, then we know that God is pleased. We must sing also with the respect to Scripture's silence. Someone might say, well, some people do say, well, God did not tell us not to use musical instruments. He didn't tell us not to do it this way and that way. And so we can use them. We can bring those things in. But this is false reasoning. This is false reasoning when it comes to God, because we need to imagine God directly telling us everything He does not want. It would be an endless line of commands. It would be Him telling us, don't sing, but don't do this, this, and it would go on and on. If you are to order a package on Amazon, you tell them exactly what you want. Do you have to make efforts to tell them what you do not want? Do you have to tell them all the items that they have available? Don't give me any of this, this, and this, and this. We don't reason that way with anything else. Why would we reason that way with God? We don't reason that way. God's silence matters. I mean, we look at passages like Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 5 and so on, and we know that the silence of God matters. God commands us to sing. That eliminates musical instruments. It eliminates humming, whistling, beatboxing, whatever you want to put in. God says no. Now, those who advocate musical instruments in worship will bring up, well, what about the Old Testament? 2 Chronicles 5, Psalm 150, and so on. The quick answer for that, which can be another lesson in itself, we're not under the Old Testament times. Now, we do use the Old Testament wisely, but we do not use it in a way where we're trying to find the commands to follow under our New Testament. Now, there's something to consider along with the silence of Scriptures, and that is the use of expediencies. Now, I know that's a big word, but because other preachers use it, I'm going to have to let you know that that's a word that's being used out there, okay? But what that basically means is you're using something to accomplish a certain command, but it's done in a way where you're not breaking the command. And so we are commanded to sing. And we're commanded to sing to one another, which lets us know that we're going to have to sing the same songs at the same time. Can you imagine if everyone decided, we're going to sing right now. You just choose what song you want to sing, and we're all going to sing that song. Each person is singing a different song, right? How is that going to teach and admonish one another? So we're all going to have to sing the same song at the same time. What helps us with that? We use songbooks. Is the songbook changing the command? No. Are we worshiping God with the songbook? Actually giving God the book and worshiping Him with that? No. But we need it in order to read the same words. It's an expediency. It helps us carry out the command. Same thing with the song leader. Helps us be on the same page, do the same stanzas, make sure we're not all singing different stanzas and everything's being confused. The song leader tells us when to start, how many stanzas. But the song leader is not doing something drastically different over here while you all do something else. We're all doing the same thing together. Now, brethren and friends, this does not mean that musical instruments are sin in itself. It's not a sin to play the guitar on your downtime or even as a career. If you do that, that's great. But God has not commanded such for worship. It's not for me to question God. Well, why, God? Why don't you allow us to put this in? I mean, you allowed David to do it. I mean, you allowed the Old Testament Israelites to do it. Why can't we do it? Well, it's not for me to question God. If God tells us He wants us to sing, that's what He wants. God deserves the praise that He deserves and what He wants. We must sing to God also with the understanding. 1 Corinthians 14:15. Very simply, Paul says, I will sing with the Spirit, and I will also sing with the understanding. 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 15. And so Paul, he makes it known that this is what I'm going to do because it pleases God. I will sing with the Spirit. I will also sing with the understanding. He's going to understand what he sings. And so this eliminates using babbling or made-up words or trying to sing in another language that you don't even know. It also means that the teaching must be understandable. We're not to choose a song that is like totally foreign from the Scriptures. We have no idea what it's talking about, but we're going to sing it anyway. We know what it means, and when it's being sung to us, we learn from it. We have to be careful what songs we choose in the songbook. We got to be careful what stanzas we choose. And if we're going to choose a song that maybe is challenging, or maybe there's some words there that are not used in casual conversation, then it doesn't hurt to kind of just talk about what that means. I try to every now and then give sermons on different songs so that when we do sing them, we know exactly what's being sung and we have the understanding. Also, we have to sing in a way where it's done decently in order. That helps our understanding. 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 40. There it says, let all things be done decently and in order. This means that we are not to, or it eliminates the actions of running up and down the pews and around the auditorium and just yelling just all sorts of noises. That is not what the Bible teaches. Let things be done decently and in order. And we know by doing that, it also helps us have the understanding. We must also sing to God with the right heart. Going back to Colossians 3:16, singing with grace in your hearts. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 19, making melody in your heart. And so your heart, your mind is being activated. It's being used in a right way. That's what it means to be worshiping God in spirit, with the right character, with the right mindset. We're not just going through the motions here. It's not just to come here, all right, I'm going to sing a couple of songs. I'm going to take a sip, throw a tip, and I did my duty, and God's pleased. We are to do it with sincerity, with the right heart, with everything we have. We are not to go through the motions. In singing, we are giving to God. In every worship act, it involves giving. We teach and admonish each other, but we also give God the praise and the glory. Even when we're teaching each other about the sacrifice of Christ, we are telling God, we acknowledge that you have done this for us. We're giving him acknowledgement. We're giving him thanks for it. Brethren and friends, when we do exactly what God has instructed, then we can have the confidence that he is pleased with our worship. Why should we give him what he wants? Because he deserves it. Friends, maybe you're visiting and this has gone completely against what you have been taught. Maybe you've been taught something drastically different your entire life. But consider that I have given you the verses that plainly say what God wants. And go home, study it for yourselves. See if these things are so. And if you want to discuss them further, we can do that with you. But if you're here and you know exactly what needs to be done to become a child of God and to live faithfully and to worship correctly, then why don't you let it be known as we stand and sing.